We do not negotiate with terrorists is a great concept in theory, but some African states shouldn't adopt this approach because they are often the ones creating these problems in the first place. Plus, many do not even have the military might to back it up. In fact, even countries that claim not to negotiate with terrorists often do. Otherwise, soldiers, journalists, citizens, and more would never see their families again if it weren't for negotiating with terrorists. And I think this theory works when you have Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger attitude, the firepower, and the full understanding of the situation. Not when your population live in a constant state of fear, you are losing lives and parts of the country at an alarming rate. Look, bombing villages and towns controlled by rebels to defeat the rebellion is not sustainable, especially if the grievances of those communities are still not addressed, because this only creates more room for the cycle of violence to continue. I mean, some of these groups exist because they are trying to fight for the piece of the wealth as politicians use the country's resources like their wallet, taking for themselves and their families while ignoring the rest of the population. Other groups exist because they were initially security forces protecting their communities because the government failed them, and then you have bandits on a power trip with no cause. But here's the crazy part. Most rebel groups claim to fight bad governance, but very often, once in power, they become the example of it. And we often talk about rebel groups, but we rarely discuss the reasons that breed these groups because people don't just wake up one day and choose to live by the sword. It doesn't make sense. You see, the reality is that the civilian population is tired of these wars. People just want to go home. And most of these fighters live in precarious conditions and want to go home but cannot without facing the justice from a government that won't address their community's need. So to improve their conditions, they break up to form smaller groups. Meanwhile, rebel leaders live a much better life than their soldiers, wearing many hats such as businessmen, military men, and politicians. I'll leave it here because this subject is a bit complex.
We, ni nini?